Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for November 11th, 2025. November 11th historically has been known as Armistice Day because it was on this day that World War I ended in 1918. Now, we're going to take a look today at what was behind World War I, why it occurred, and secondly, how do we prevent World War III? Now, the origin of World War I was the Great Game, the British imperial plan to shut Russia out of Central Asia, with the idea that they were fearful that the Russians would intend to come in through Central Asia, the Khyber Pass in Afghanistan, for example, into India and take the Indian subcontinent away from the British East India Company. Now, this was a classic example of a conflict between empires. It's not clear that Russia had a real strategy to move into India, but the British used that, as they're using today the argument that Putin intends to capture Western Europe, to have an arms buildup and a preparation for war to defend the interests of the empire. Now, in terms of the British policy, this goes back to the 1830s, but it was really a reaction to the American Revolution, the defeat of British imperialism by the American colonial forces. Now, in the 1830s, they decided to move aggressively into Afghanistan to cut off the Russians. And the idea was that Central Asia was a theater that should be under British control, under the British Empire. And one aspect of this was constant skirmishes. The British sent in expeditionary forces, and they ended up fighting Afghans and Russians. But there were other battles, and one of the more important ones was the Crimea War of 1853 to 56, which foreshadowed the whole development of geopolitics as a war policy to defend the empire. Now, one of the turning points in this was the Russian development of the Trans-Caspian Railroad in 1879. And this was identified by Lord Curzon, one of the leading forces for the empire in Great Britain, who said that this is a threat to the British control of the region, as it would reconstitute the ancient Silk Road. And that's what this fight has been about since then, the attempt to establish an integrated Eurasia with Europe, which would be a trading zone over land connected by rail that would outflank the British control of the seas and their control of the ports and international trade. Now, this was concretized in 1904 by Lord Halford Mackinder at the British Royal Geographical Society in his speech on the pivot of history, in which he laid out why the Eurasia is the battleground and that the effort must be to make sure that Germany and Russia are never unified, as that would be the great threat to the sea power of the United Kingdom. Now, therefore, they had to prevent a German-Russian alliance at all costs. That's why World War I happened. It moved in a series of events such as the Entente Cordiale, the alliance between Britain and France, the Triple Alliance, and so on. But the whole idea was that you have to protect the empire from intrusion by sovereign states working together. Now, the killing of World War I ended on this day in 1918, but the legacy remains because of the doctrine of geopolitics. So the question is posed to all of you, and of course, this is a question posed by Lyndon LaRouche. How do you defeat geopolitics? Geopolitics is essentially the idea of different, almost different species with different desires, the idea of the fight of each against all, the imperial tradition that you have to have a power over and above nation states, and then you can trigger conflict between different states based on identity, religion, tribal connections, and so on. And that's how geopolitics works. So how do you overcome it? How do you get people to think outside of the control of the ideology of geopolitics? That was the subject of the Schiller Institute conference in Paris last weekend. It was, how do you deploy measures of statecraft to defeat geopolitics? And what we identified in the conference is the central role that Africa will play in the period ahead. That this is based on the African nations moving together with the global South as a whole to reject colonialism, neo-imperialism, whatever you want to call it. And this is not just a slogan, but an evolution. So our conference was titled Emancipation of Africa and the Global Majority, a challenge for Europe. Now this is a big challenge for Europe because Europe is pulled together around geopolitics. The fear of a Russian threat or a Chinese threat or even an American threat, and why Europe has to unify and spend precious resources on a war that could never be won. So the ability to defeat this depends on, first of all, knowing history, real history, not dates and places and things of that sort, but what are the thoughts and ideas and cultural policies that define how nations function and how they can be brought to a higher understanding, what sometimes is called the maturation or the determination to become adults in history as opposed to squabbling children fighting over a shrinking pie. And so that's what the topic was of the conference. Now, this is a method, requires a method based on cultural development, the idea of creativity. And this, of course, was a central theme of Schiller. And I just quote to you from Helge Zepp-LaRouche, who is an expert on Schiller. We've produced for the Schiller Institute numerous books of translations of his poetry and his dramas. But here's what she said on Schiller. And by the way, his birthday was November 10th. She said, "You have to be able to educate your soul and your mind, to be able to absorb the world in an all-encompassing manner and feel compassion with the whole world." And what Helge has always emphasized is that Schiller said, one can be a patriot of a nation and at the same time a world citizen. And what we need now is for people to embrace the idea of world citizens, not in the form of a homogeneous globalization, but that each culture brings something of great importance in its traditions and its relations with internally, brings something to the world that adds to the great harmony of many voices with the same underlying theme of the unanimous intention of civilization, of humanity, to advance and improve the conditions for all people. This means an alliance of sovereign states committed to mutual benefit. And this is a battle for human culture. You have to recognize the beautiful potential of all human beings. Now, we had at the conference presentations on statecraft in the form of economic policy, but also a heavy emphasis on art and music. There's a concert, and included in this is science, because if you put art, music, and science together, what are you dealing with? The creative potential of man to uncover the secrets of the universe and to use that knowledge to improve the conditions for human civilization. Geopolitics has a different standpoint. It starts from the standpoint that we, a specific identity group, deserve more, deserve the control, deserve the resources, deserve to rule over others. and it appeals to the bestial instincts in underdeveloped man. What Helga has emphasized in her fundamental principles is that the source of evil in the world is a lack of development. So how do we counter it? Development, culture, classical music, classical science. That's how you overcome the tendency for the universe, or for the earth, to be a human jungle of each group fighting for its interests against all others. So I encourage you, look at the videos that will be linked at the description section from the conference that just took place. I took some time yesterday, in fact a lot of time, to watch the videos. And there's fascinating material on Rembrandt, on Gödel in science, the importance of Gödel, on the development of cultures that are fighting for a real sovereign relationship, that is for their own sovereignty, but a relationship with other sovereign states. It's a powerful series of presentations. Watch them, study them, ask questions. You can contact any of us whenever you need to take up your concerns or your issues or your questions. But most importantly, don't be passive. Don't sit back and accept the idea of the geopolitical universe, which says that we have differences that are unbridgeable. That's why we're heading toward World War III. That was behind World War I and World War II. A World War III would probably mean the end of the human race. So there's no basis for passivity when that comes to that. So take my advice, watch these videos, share them, and be back tomorrow.